So appreciate everybody coming out. So like I was saying earlier, I've been in the identity space for about 25 years. And I started out working for a credit bureau. And you're like, what does that have to do with identity? Right. So it really had to do with proving a person's identity really belongs to them and then establishing their credit worthiness. So then I evolved my career a little bit. I stayed with them for a long time. Decided to get my master's, and we got some college basketball fans. So I did my undergrad at Clemson. So don't boo me. I'm an ACC fan. I'm in friendly territory. Right. So, but I did get my master's at Georgia. So, and my wife went to Alabama. So we're kind of a football family. So, but after I left Georgia, I did some business credit stuff for Dun & Bradstreet. And I was like, wow. They gave me 2 accounts to manage, right? They called me Mr. Depot. I managed Home Depot and Office Depot. It was miserable. Like, I have to tell you, you want to talk about polar opposites? One spent money, one didn't. And once I sold everything I could have won, I was like, what's this other one going to do? And I won't tell you which one actually spends and doesn't, but I'm pretty sure you guys can figure that one out. So then I went into, SunGuard data systems. They don't exist anymore. I think they're called FIS now and everything. But it was really interesting. I went into the field called digital signature. So applying a person's identity to make sure that they can legally sign a document. So non-repudiation is what they call it. So after I left there, I went to CA Technologies. CA doesn't exist anymore. So I'm looking at all these companies that don't really exist anymore, right? And so Broadcom bought them. And I was like, it was a good opportunity to leave them. And I went to a company called Okta, right? So CSA, right? Cloud Security Alliance, Okta. It was great. Okta was wonderful until they brought in some people that didn't know what the hell they were doing. And then a bunch of breaches started taking place. So I was fortunate to be lured over to Savient before all the breaches happened. And when I came into Savient, they actually said, you know what we want you to do? We want you to be an advisor in the privileged access management space. It's an area that it needs to evolve. Just vaulting credentials and everything, it doesn't make sense anymore. We have to do things in a more ephemeral nature because of the adoption of the cloud. Cloud's ephemeral in nature, right? So it's all about doing just-in-time type of access. And that's what happened when we were talking about the privilege space. So then they go to me and they're like, hey, guess what? We got this big challenge. Everybody's got these standardized processes for your internal identities. And they said, what do we do about these external folks? Nobody wants to own them. We work with our clients and everybody's like, HR is like, I don't want to own them because it's not standardized. It's not something predictable. So we have to come up with a process to make things better for these external identities. And I'm going to overly simplify what I call an external identity. And we're going to dive into it a little bit deeper. But I call them the non-W-2 employees. Because the threat internally is your paycheck. I can manage the behavior I want from you through the incentives of your paycheck. What can you not do to an external identity? Threaten their paycheck. Right? So you have to work with those folks a little bit differently than you work with your internal folks. Let's see. Look at me. I might need IT support here. It's not advancing.
Let's see.
Bring it down here.
Look at that space bar.
Nice.
IT.
Sweet. So the agenda today, identifying, who are these external identities, the challenges and risks associated with them, and then approach to address and improve the process for these individuals. I'm going to go off script here a little bit because I've been doing a little bit of research and nobody can ask questions here. I'm not a NIST expert and all that, but not too long ago, NIST, after 6 years, actually did an advancement in their framework. And the advancement that took place, anybody can tell the difference? What's the difference between the two sides? Governance, right? They're applying controls around the governance. And that's not just the identity governance. It's around the processes, it's the procedures. It's basically talking about auditing the process. Can you prove you got the right controls in place to apply to your business to make it more secure, right? So ISO 27001, anybody familiar with it, right? All right, how about organizationally? Who either applies ISO 27001 or NIST as a best practice to manage the cybersecurity in their enterprise? Anybody confidently say, well, I'm using one of those as the framework? Ah, I like it. You're using them both. So CMMC. So I like that. And the why I like that, because everybody else that didn't raise their hand, they're like, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Or it's, we're coming up with our own processes. Here's the challenge with that. If you're coming up with your own processes, you can't go to the board and say, hey, I've got a cybersecurity framework that I came up with myself, and I want you to invest in it because I'm telling you it's going to work. It's better to default back onto a framework to ask for those dollars, to ask for that time, to ask for that investment, because you're educating the board on the importance of what you're trying to accomplish, which ultimately is brand protection at a very macro level. So I'm encouraging you, don't come up with your own best, practice around cybersecurity. They're flexible. These frameworks are so flexible that you can make it malleable to your own business, but you can go and report to the board and say, hey, I'm following the NIST guidelines. I'm following the CMMC guidelines. I'm following ISO 27001. And I'll give you even more importance. Anybody publicly traded in here? So where am I about to go with that? Cybersecurity compliance. So back in December, they came out with these new regs where you have to publish your processes and your procedures about how you're basically going to protect the enterprise. Embedded in that language was all things third party, right? And that is what NIST is calling it. NIST is calling out all of these risks that sit outside of your enterprise that you want to make sure you're controlling. So where does that SOX cybersecurity compliance result? Where does it go to? Who has to sign off on it? It's the board. The board has to assign a senior member, which typically is the CISO, and that's the hatchet man. Because if something goes wrong, they have someone to blame. So you better have your ducks in a row. So I went off script there, but just because I started reading about things and the changing of NIST and then the SOX compliance and the CMMC, everybody's talking the same thing. They're bringing their standards up to the level of making sure external identities, third parties are covered, but more importantly, it's the overall governance around the identities within your organization. And I said the wrong word there because it's within and also outside of your organization. So I'm going to put this up here on the screen. You all can read it. And we broke these third parties up or external identities up into 3 different categories. You have third parties, partners, and individuals. On the third party side, I'm going to, again, overly simplify this. These are individuals that are providing a service to your organization. Usually it's a cost center. You're paying them to do something. The folks in the middle, these are the money makers with you. These are partners that are trying to bring up your brand, generate revenue for your organization. Your individuals, it's a catch-all category. These are outsiders that are working with you. Some are temporary, they come and go. A big one up here is retirees. They require access long after they're no longer associated with your organization. And that access gets compromised. So if I were to ask the room, if you could confidently answer, how many external identities do you have? Do you think there's anybody in your organization that can answer that? He laughs.
Not accurate.
Right.
They would all guess.
They would guess.
And then you'd have a sum of guess.
Correct. That is exactly right. So there's actually an industry study, several that have been out there, and the average is roughly about 60% of the organizations out there cannot accurately say how many external identities are accessing their enterprise. So of those, what's the percent of who actually got breached because of a third-party relationship? Greater than that. It's actually 2/3. So why is that? Ah, he nailed it. It's the easiest identity to compromise for a hacker. What they do is they go and compromise that external. They call it the nth degree relationship, right? Everybody knows about the direct relationship, but what about your partner's partners who they trust, you don't have visibility to, and they give them access? What about the shared credentials that take place? Think about the lines of business that come into your enterprise and they say, hey, Bob over here needs access. And what does Bob, the manager say, this external identity, Bob, what does he do? Well, some guys go straight to the application owner and they say, hey, I'm already paying him. I need him to be productive. Give him access. What have you lost? 1000%. You lost complete control of that identity. And guess what's even worse? The manager who sits internal to you says, Bob, this external guy, needs the same level of access because he's doing the same type of role as somebody that's been with your organization for 20 years. So somebody that's been with your organization for 20 years has hopped around departments. I call them entitlement hogs. And now Bob, day one, has 20 years worth of entitlements to your organization. Guess who gets compromised? Bob. Bob gets compromised and the bad guy gets to kind of float around your enterprise without any control or visibility to what's happening. So where am I missing anybody? I always ask the audience here. It's like, this list is a little bit shorter than this list, and this list is a little bit shorter than that list. Anybody else to add from an external perspective? And it's supposed to try to cover multi-industry. You see clinicians up here. Parent companies. That's a great one. So mergers and acquisitions, right? So you guys are going you go through these mergers and acquisitions and they create what are called these white rooms, right? And that's where this collaboration of trust is supposed to take place. But during that trust, there's access that's required within both organizations. How are you managing that? How are you stripping that access away once it's granted? So there was another one.
Joint ventures, but yes. So you have something literally comes in here, jumps out a wireless network or plugs into a network port
Yeah.
with a Windows 7 machine, and you're like, they have full access to the internet and there's no blocks on it.
So right along those lines are shared credentials, right? A lot of guests, they're like, hey, let's just make it 1, 2, 3 guests, and you get it today, and tomorrow this guy gets it, and it's just shared upon it, and then there's no attribution to who actually did what.
Let's see, regulators or auditors.
Outside firms. So they would fall within somewhere over here, right? From a third party perspective, but you're right. Yeah.
Well, I think government, like someone you're not hiring.
Sure.
They just.
No, it's a great one. Absolutely. So I'm going to start spelling out the pain when we start talking about these external credentials. So wasted non-employee time, right? How long does it take for a non-employee to get the access needed to do their job? Anybody have an average? Throw an average out there. Like, think about your own organization. You're bringing in an external identity, and how long does it take before they become productive? Oh, I want to know what you're doing. I want to know exactly what you're doing. You know what you're doing? I know what you're doing. You're calling the admin owners. You're saying, give this guy access immediately. You're Bob. So the average is 2 weeks. you're paying these people for no activity for 2 weeks before they're productive and can do anything for your organization. All right, the next one, sponsors don't let us know about changes in user access. Ever feel like you're the last one to know someone left? Right? You have these external identities. You've got these partnerships, like people, and I'm trying not to pick on specific people. I'll generalize it. The big GSIs, Deloitte, Accenture, KPMG, PwC, whoever, right? They have these teams that just come in and they do a bunch of work in your shop. Do you have any clue the comings and goings of those individuals? All of a sudden, you're provided a list and say, these guys are going to work on your project. You have no clue who's actually doing it. They've all been provisioned. They all have the access. And some of them are gone because you're not close enough to the end user. Next one, there was an audit finding around external access. You brought up the auditors earlier, right? Have you been breached due to a forgotten third-party account? So a lot of these external identities, they're contract-based, they're time-based. How are you enforcing the removal of their access? Where's the enforcement? The contract says they're gone tomorrow, March 22nd. But in what makes sure that happens? Should. How?
We must take away everyone's access.
What can I do in 3 months? What can I do in 3 months? What can I do? True, but I could do a lot in 3 months.
Contract ends from Germany that thing says, hey, anything related to this company or can be revoked on the state. If it's an AD.
How are you automating that? I love that you're saying this because I'm gonna spell that example out here in a few slides. Love that.
Yeah, I think it's the business need value for partners.
I missed it. One more time.
We have a continuous business need for partners.
Yes.
We check partners continuous business need for the access.
Yeah.
Based upon that, we get a report every day.
You get one every day.
Yes.
Who reviews?
Our visa reviews.
Okay, and what if I put Mickey Mouse on that report? What would you do?
That's, the other CP of that report actually. Basically, they are giving us an EA saying this is the other thing from the OEMs and partners.
How do you enforce the accuracy of that?
We have an automation. In IBM ID is given as an external ID for those. And
You know what I'm describing though?
They are using Savient.
I know this.
yeah, I know. That's
But
what-
watch this. I know this because what he's describing is his internal process. Because IBM's not using us for external identity. But I have a feeling I know where you're going. Because what you've done is you've consumed some of your external credentials into your internal framework. And I'll tell you why there's flaws with that. But I like that you brought that up.
Okay, and there's some comments on the room.
Yes.
So where it says post expiring in the user's account, if user needs further access, they can always request re-access and go through the process again.
So one more time, they're forced to
Post expiring user's account.
Okay, so how are they automating?
I'm reading what he.
Okay.
But if user needs further access,
I agree with the approach.
yeah,
But I want to understand how, and we're going to get into this. The how portion is why we're having this discussion. So let's get through a few more of these because I'm going to bring up one that I'm hoping that half this room hasn't even thought of, and it's not even up here on the screen. But so partners complain about not getting access. People are circumventing the process, right? I talked about it's taking too long, go straight to the app owner, boom, boom, boom. We're having some trust issues. Non-employee data is not as reliable as employee data. We're going to talk about that a little bit too, right? I don't want this to be a scare tactic around risk because what you want to do, that prior slide is you want to embrace those third parties. You want to embrace those external identities. So it's not a risk framework, it's a trust framework. And the more trust you have in the process, the more confident you're going to be about your cybersecurity practice. So last one, don't get me started on compliance. How much paperwork's involved? Guess what happens when there's a lot of paperwork? Rubber stamp, right? You throw a big list at me and says, do these people still need access? Yes. Mickey Mouse is on that list. Nobody's reading it. It's too cumbersome. It happens too often. So why do it? So this example I'm about to bring up, I hope, and I know it's happened at least one of your shops. Think about a person that you fired for cause, right? You no longer want them in your organization. They're gone, right? You do a great job getting all the access removed from them. What does their resume look like? I'll use Red Hat, for example. Somebody has worked for Red Hat for 10 years, fired for cause, they did something bad. What does their resume look like? They look great for 10 years at Red Hat. Guess who's attracted to them? One of those third parties that I had up on the screen. The third party hires them. Now it's a third party of Red Hat. Guess what door they come right back in? They establish more access within Red Hat coming through another door. If it's not centralized, all identities into a single identity warehouse, that individual comes right back in. Their intentions might be good. They just still love the organization, want to work for the organization. But I promise you, if they're fired for cause, they're coming in to do damage. And we've seen countless times where that's happened. Again, I don't want to go to the scare tactic. We've had clients just go that route, right? And they're like, you have to stop this for us. We need deduplication. We need checks and balances at the front door. We need to enforce the contracts. You know, that they're only supposed to have access for 90 days. How do you automate it? Great. I'd rather talk about the trust framework. Let's build up that collaboration so you have these good, nurtured relationships. It needs to be a positive experience, not only for the organization embracing the solution, but also those that are using it to come in the door. All right, we talked about this a little bit, right? On the employee side, pretty standardized, right? HR raises their hand because they have to. They, formalize the process. You have an HR system. It's your source of truth. They come in. It's a pretty, HR is managing all this loops and everything, but they're used to it. And it comes out. It's pretty straight. Non-employee, that's what it looks like. Your lines of business are doing their own thing. So like, man, my people need this access. You better give me the access, and everybody's doing their own thing. Nobody has a clue exactly what's going on. You could have the same identity coming in the door 4 different times. So I'm trying to build in your minds this concept of a single digital front door. So I describe it as being predictable success. And there's a formula for that. Predictable success equals predictable outcomes plus predictable costs. So again, I'm going to use the board example. If you went back up to the board and you said, hey, we've adopted the NIST framework, whatever standard you want, we're following it to a T, and I need an investment. I need an investment to actually control this mess that now I've inherited, because nobody wants to own this. I promise you, HR does not want to own your external identity.
So a former company of mine was like this, where the employee life cycle was really long and whatever. They decided to go to a contract to hire role because the HR onboarding timeline was just forever.
Mhm.
So that was a advantage in their eyes, because 8 months to hire somebody is ridiculous. So
Sure.
how do you deal with something like that, where the goal is to cut down on the roadblocks, which is why they went to the shorter onboarding of the external non-employees?
So what you're describing is take the employee life cycle and throw it over here. So what they haven't done, they haven't even accomplished what they meant to accomplish on the internal side, right?
Internal side, it was that way. It was just a long process. So they said, will go to an external to start to make it shorter because somebody had a good idea.
It's shorter, but and then again, I don't want to go down the risk path. It became shorter because they're cutting steps in the process. Right? Is it better? I don't know. Right? You don't know until you dive into the details. So there, and I'm going to kind of go along those lines here. So people have tried to solve this. And here are the three big ways they've tried to solve it. Homegrown. Anybody build things around here? I hear Red Hat's big at building things. Right? So it's not purpose built, right? So as soon as the person or people that have built it and they're long gone and you've customized it that you can't even tell what your intent was to begin with, it's not a repeatable process. If it's not predictable, I'm getting back to that again. Predictable success equals predictable outcomes plus predictable costs, right? Predictable outcomes come about when you standardize and automate. Your predictable costs come, and we're all in the room from a CSA perspective. I love the cloud. I used to work for an on-prem provider and cloud was bad, right? 10 years ago. What? Cloud? Too risky. Man, cloud's awesome. You know why cloud's awesome? It's efficient. And every single day, every learning, people poo-poo on the AI space and everything. Guess what it's doing for cloud? It's making it more intelligent. It's making it more efficient for all of us. So that's where the predictable costs come in, especially from a SaaS solution provider, right? The heavy lifting is done within the provider shop. It's not done within your own organization. Your own organization, sole purpose is to come up with policy and to enforce that policy. But the solutions in a cloud world, a SaaS world, they're malleable to adopt to your business. But they're not so malleable where you get to these crazy customizations. I call it fixing stupid. Because if the cloud solution can't do it can't do it just by configuring things, you shouldn't be doing it. Because there's hundreds, if not thousands of organizations that have already adopted the SaaS solution to accomplish the same things that you're trying to accomplish. Why would you go off the reservation? Stay within the framework. Outsource providers, HR contractor model. Anybody know, and I pray to God, I didn't look up on the screen, but is Workday a sponsor? Okay, good.
No.
Workday's expensive, right? And everybody, I mean, they think they've got this external identity solved, they throw it into Workday. And they're paying anywhere between like $75 and $150 a user. And Workday isn't doing that last mile provisioning, deprovisioning, governance, right? They're not doing your lifecycle management of the identity. What they're doing for you is a really expensive source of truth. And that's the only benefit you're getting out of it. All right, I'm going to go through quickly, an example here. Some of the players that kind of play within the chaos that is external identity. So Peter Gregory here, the great fictitious, company name Acme, right? Corporation. So we have a vendor sponsor here. He selected a partner named Hooli. Daniel Smith works for Hooli. He's an administrator for Hooli. Emily Rice. Anybody have third-party risk in your organization, right? They're responsible, excuse me. They're responsible for looking at the risk around this third-party relationship. Is this organization somebody that we should be partnering with? What exposure do they put upon us? Think back to the NIST standards. Think back to CMMC. Think back to any of the cybersecurity framework. Third-party risk, if they're not currently participating in a role within your identity landscape, they need to be. Andrew is actually an end user within Hooli, right? He's going to be supporting you. Think of him as being, will assist with orders and supply. So think supply chain in this role. And then Lucille, there might be some Lucille's in the room, responsible for granting access and stripping away access to certain applications. Let's see what it looks like today. And I'm just going to play this all the way out. This is what a manual process looks like. And this is where the 2 weeks, and somebody said 4 weeks, comes into play. You know, Peter here goes to Emily and says, hey, I want to partner with Hooli. Emily's like, let me run some my, whatever tool she's using, some, third-party risk solution. She gives the thumbs up, and he goes back to Daniel, and Daniel says, hey, I've got Andrew over here, and he needs access to your environment. All this is being done via email. How do you audit that? Now you need to remove access. What do you do again? Oh, we got to start this whole chain again, right? Boom, boom, boom.
Usually people do it with their ticketing system like service.
You could say that, but how are they doing this? So I agree with you. There's a strong integration that needs to take place with your ticketing system, but is your ticketing system giving you access to what they need access to do their job?
No, but to track, your question was, how are they tracking it? How are they?
So you're giving access to Daniel to your ticketing system.
So it, people can send an email to
An email,
a list, not a person, right?
but you're doing an email. Is that auditable?
Yeah, that goes into your team.
Okay, but what is Andrew doing? Is he in that ticketing system too? He's the end user.
Some cases.
How do you know Andrew should still be working in your environment? You lose visibility.
Exactly. That is the problem.
That's the problem. So if you think about it, if you had a solution that knew all of the actions of all of the activity of all of your users, would you have better control? So think about the inactivity. Somebody stops logging into a system. If it was automated in your environment, there'd be a trigger that says, make up the rule. Somebody hasn't logged in 10 days. Okay, the first alert is, why don't we check with somebody who's responsible for that person? Should they still have access? Right? It's called a micro certification. Your policy in your environment might say every quarter we're going to certify the access of these individuals. You have to make it in consumable chunks, meaning it can't be this huge list, because you'll start a certification process if it's too lengthy, and before you finish it, you're starting another one. That's not repeatable. It's not sustainable. But if you can do micro certifications where you're getting triggers that basically says there's inactivity within the account, this type of access, what we're trying to get you towards, and somebody brought it up earlier around zero trust. It's a cliche type of word in my mind. I like more calling it just enough access. So JEA, just enough access to do your job. Take away the standing access, especially if we're talking about standing privilege. A lot of these external identities elevate to privilege really quickly. And a lot of times without your awareness. You want to strip that. If they should not have that access, because guess what happens? Well, I saw Delaney up there. Sorry. I'm going to go after them a little bit. PAM solutions. What's the traditional approach with PAM? Who feels confident in their PAM processes? Privilege access management. He said, guess what he's doing? He's vaulting credentials. Am I right? You're vaulting them and you're rotating them. And you feel pretty good about the rotation process.
I've been in touch, I don't recall that.
Yes, I like it. So traditional PAM players, what they're doing is it's the old school method. It's the whole moat that's around the castle, right? If I vault all of these credentials and they have to check out, check in the password. So every time that they use it, it gets rotated, boom, boom, boom. What can happen during that standing privilege? What can happen with exposed passwords? Because they're checking out the password, it's exposed, they can see it, it can be shared, it cannot be checked back in. Get away from that. Again, this is CSA, Cloud Security Alliance. Embrace the cloud. What is cloud? I brought it up earlier. It's ephemeral in nature. When you're ephemeral in nature, your access to your privileged environment should also be ephemeral. It should be time bound. It should be passwordless. And they call it just in time, JIT, just in time type of access. So what we're doing is we're checking to make sure you are who you say you are. We're giving you the access for your intended purpose. It's being session recorded. And we're taking down in that entire session, we're taking down that entire identity after your job is done. And that is how you become more secure. And it's especially important when you're talking about your external identities. So just to further complicate the madness that we showed up on the screen earlier, you're probably doing some of these things. Identity verification. So we brought up identity proofing earlier. Proving an identity is who they say they are before you're giving them the access that they want. Clearances, background checks, right? A lot of these you're doing for your internal folks, but are you really applying them towards your external environment? A lot of times you're not doing this because what you're doing is you're putting it in the contract of your third-party relationships and you're saying, hey, do this. And they say, yep, we're doing it. No, they're not. They just signed a form that says, yes, we're doing it. Right? And they're taking the risk, but they're putting your brand at risk. So why not automate the process for them? Do the checks and balances for them. Learning management system. I'm going to touch upon this. I'll touch upon that a little bit later. So better at collaboration, more control, right? We're starting to get into that whole predictable success, right? Predictable outcomes, predictable costs equals predictable success. I'm going to really high level this stuff. When you're talking about external identities, the first thing you want to do is you want to embrace the organization that they're coming in from, assuming that they're coming in from a larger organization, not an individual, right? You're going to apply policies that are going to be risk-based around specifically that individual. What this does for you, it allows you to embrace automation. It allows you to basically create efficiencies for your environment to do birthright access, to make it idiot-proof for the end user, because the only thing that's going to be displayed to them are the things that you're allowing them to have access to. So many times I see people put this catalog of all this access of their entire environment, and they let people try to grab it. And they might have the safeguards on the back end that says, you know what, you're not in the right position, you shouldn't have. Why even expose it to them? Why even give them an idea that this is the type of infrastructure, the type of applications that you use in your environment? User onboarding, quick and painless. First impressions, right? You want to make a good first impression. This is where you're establishing that trust with that end individual. The automated workflows. Again, I want to drive towards efficiencies. If you embrace the standardization and the automation, you're going to create efficiencies for your environment on top of the security best practices and brand protection. Continuous compliance. A lot of times people bring up certification campaigns and they have to be manual, right? It's got to be done by people, and it takes a lot of time and takes people away from their day job to do these certifications. You can get to the point where your process is so sound and automated, you actually can automate the compliance portion. You can satisfy auditors by saying, hey, we in the environment looked at all the access of these individuals. They still exist. They still belong in this environment, and we can do the certification campaign and report. Delegated administration, huge, right? You want to spread the burden. You know, a lot of the folks in the room are in IT security and everything, and some of this gets thrown onto your plate to run these campaigns, make sure that people have the right access, or you work with the lines of business. Why not go external? Why not spread the burden to those that are closest to the end user and allow them to run the campaigns? Even better, allow them to ask for access on behalf of somebody that works for them. They're the ones closest to the comings and goings of those individuals and what type of access they should have. And then the offboarding. If the contract says this project lasts 90 days, set up the controls that says a week in advance of the offboarding effort, I'm going to give a warning and says, hey, you've got a week left of access. And then I might say, 3 days you have left and 1 day. Build in the succession management too. If you don't hear anything back from those that should be responding, have somebody else as a secondary be notified. before you strip the access away. You don't hear anything, strip away the access. And I promise you, if they need the access, they're going to jump up and down and say, get me the access again. And you want to make it easy for them to be back onboarded for that access. But guess what? If the contract says project ends in 90 days, audit will say they don't get the access until we renew the contract. So you want to make sure things are in sync.
And then you can charge a fee for accelerated, oops, I need it overnight.
Hey, whatever you want, right?
You gotta pay for that.
I like calling it managed through incentives. If you get the incentives right, you'll get the behavior, right? So some people call it the carrot and the stick. Big fan of the stick, but whatever. I'm going to build this one out too. So we talked about it. Delegate onboarding of new vendor user, approve new vendor user request, auto provision, right? A lot of people, you know, they go through this process around, I don't like birthright access. I'm giving away too much access too early on. If you get your policies right and you get your roles right, you can do a lot of automation and you can take a lot of that manual effort off of your plate. And then guess what? You can certify it in an automated fashion because you're going to look for the anomalies, right? That's all you have to look for going forward. You have to verify that the person's still there. And if they're still there in the same role, they should have the same access in which you birthrighted them. Unless you look for inactivity, right? And if they have inactivity, you just strip the access away. Elevated just-in-time access and record the session. So that's where I talked about an external user coming in, ephemeral session when they get elevated to privilege, time-bound, no passwords exposed, especially when you're talking about an external identity. They do not have to follow your same PAM internal processes. A lot of folks think like, oh, I have a PAM solution. I don't need to do anything different. Cloud's different, right? So you can do things different for cloud, but also your on-prem and cloud, how they apply to the different type of populations you're embracing, you can have different processes and still allow them to have the access. In fact, some people say it's even more secure because there's not cross-pollination of the individuals. So, you know, the ideal future state, right? Anybody require training before certain application type of access? Like you got to certify on something before you give them the access. All right, how do you do it? Right. Wouldn't it be nice if it was automated? You did the training, next thing you know, you got your elevated access for whatever you did the training for. It doesn't typically happen like that. You raised your hand too, right? No, somebody did over here. Back there.
We can go through training, once they're certified, then they can pass that certification information on to their manager, and the manager has to explain stuff and say, this person has met the qualifications to gain this access, then gain this access. It's not an instant process.
It's not an instant. Why is that? Is it done via email? What's the trigger mechanism after you've completed the training?
It's through the ticketing system.
Ticketing system, right? You don't have complete visibility, right? From the learning management system to the ticketing system to the person that then approves it back to the provisioning system. So what we're describing here is to embrace it all in a single platform. So all of the identities, identity proofing is in there too. How many people feel like a one and done, kind of an easy question to answer here. A one and done identity proofing is good enough to trust that identity for the lifetime of the identity. So I talked about this trust model, right? In order to establish trust over time, that trust degrades. So once it gets down to a certain level that you determine based on policy, and it could be the type of access that a person is trying to ask for. You basically say, you know what, we proofed them way back then. They've changed the device that they're coming in from. They've changed the location that they're coming in from, but they already proved who they said they were. And now all of a sudden they're asking for all this elevated type of access. Wouldn't it be nice if the system automatically just said, you know what, I'm going to do a micro certification. I'm also going to do an automated identity proofing. just to build that trust back up to a level that I feel comfortable with zero manual intervention. Again, we're getting back to standardization and automation. Background checks, third-party risk. I mentioned the contract management. I mean, your vendor management office, they're being audited like crazy, right? They're the ones responsible for the contracts in their environment. And you're the ones, or those in IT security, identity security, are the ones responsible for making sure that people have the right access. But when should the access be removed? It should follow the contract date, and that should be enforced. A lot of times that gets totally missed. Let's say you had a bad relationship with an entire organization. How do you wipe everybody out that's associated with that organization? And how do you know the effect it's going to have on your business? That's where succession management comes in, because you're understanding the dependencies of that third-party relationship so you can fill the gaps and fill the voids. But you're also making sure you're capturing anybody and everybody associated with that organization and taking away their access. So kind of getting back to, this is a horrible rendering, back to the NIST standards. Really what NIST did 6 years later, and it's like somebody got paid $1 gazillion to do this evolution, is they applied the governance, right? But all they simply did was they took elements from the identify bracket and they built out another one called governance, right? Organizational context. Like, what does this group mean to my organization? What kind of policy specifically should I apply to these groups is what that means. Risk management strategy, right? Sound familiar with the whole SOX, cybersecurity compliance? They specifically, roles and responsibilities, call out third-party relationships. I mean, everybody's heard about the Target breach, right? That took place eons ago. I guarantee you we can look yesterday and find another organization, another headline in Google, newspaper, wherever you guys use, where a company had been breached and it happened because of a third-party relationship. Fidelity just recently, within the past month. Change Healthcare, that was a good one, right? It's affecting all of us, right? Everybody gets the little notice in the mail and says, hey, guess what? You've been associated with a breach that took place and you've got, LifeLock for 2 years, That all can be avoided. Guess what happened to Change, right? Their brand just got killed. And, Fidelity, the same thing. So the whole concept here, again, I don't want to go the scare tactic route because you want to embrace those third-party relationships. Think about it as being a trust model and think about it as something that is a repeatable process that you want to own. Because again, I'm going back to the HR environment. They don't want to own these identities. Raise your hand. It's a process that you can automate, you can simplify, you can standardize. So I guess kind of my conclusion here, but I'd love to, what was that? Anthem, another great one. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Equifax, another one. Home Depot.
So is this a security issue or an IT operations issue?
It's both.
Well, I'm thinking if you have a HR system and you integrate it with your IT Active Directory, I can do a query and say, these are all these the employees. I need to disable their account. I can do with a one-line script. Once we receive notification.
You only narrowed it down to the AD credentials.
Okay.
Do those identities have any other type of access?
Not using the same time.
Right up, mainframe.
I mean, they could have any type of access because it's so narrow in your example of what you provided. You're not capturing all of the access. So that's why I challenged. What was that?
I performed on-site assessment for Change, which was earlier MD-on.
Yeah.
And they were
Nightmare.
numerous. Even the CISO did not know that they are using end-of-life support operating system.
Right. So you brought up, whose problem is this, right? You said, who I would say it is? It's the boards.
Which means it's everyone's.
Yeah.
Goes back to the seats we have.
I mean, so, SOX compliance, why did SOX come about? I'm not talking cybersecurity, SOX compliance, right? Everybody knows about the Enron and this and that, and then SOX comes around and it's about financial reporting and the truthful nature of financial reporting, right? So everybody talks about, because now what did SOX compliance do? It made it a board level standard that they had to sign off on. I call it, every quarter they sign off on the little lie. And every year they sign off on the big lie, right? But that's what it is. It's creating attribution towards somebody that's supposed to be of trustworthy status. When you're now applying SOX to cybersecurity, it's a little bit different because you're affecting what the board wants to accomplish, which is the enhancement of the brand, the enhancement of the revenue of the enterprise. So the SOX cybersecurity compliance says they have to report a material event within 4 days publicly. And on top of that, they already had to have had established standards towards how they're going to mitigate the risk to the enterprise. Right? So they already have to have these standards in place. Then a breach, well, you don't have to call it a breach, but a material event happens. They have to report. They also then have to say, here's what we're doing to mitigate that risk, short term and then a long term. So, question.
Question. So you've been talking about third parties as humans all the time. What if it's a software or something? The only way to do access is automate, right? If this is frequent, if this is high volume and everything, then the only way to do is to do this responsibility to the IT department and solve it systematically instead of just manually process it, right?
That's a philosophical conversation. My own opinion there is that those machine identities, and I'm going to generalize it, call it IoT, whatever you want to call them, service accounts, should tie back to a responsible sponsor. Should is the word, right? Because it's the only way. You have to have visibility into those machine accounts. You have to have standards. You have to have compliance around it, but it should apply back towards an internal sponsor that maintains those relationships.
It can't be an AI, API that no one, you gotta have a throat check. Someone would say you're responsible, right?
I mean, because a lot of times when you're talking about service accounts or system accounts, they talk to each other, right? And at some point they elevate to a point of personal privilege, right? Where it's a user identity type of privilege level. So if you can get your arms around assigning an identity, I call it a sponsor, to those machine relationships, you have the ability to actually control that risk. So, but yeah, it gets a little more complicated because those, you want to talk about ephemeral in nature, because you can spin those up and spin those down very quickly.
It's not one example, like one of our advisors was Travis McPhee from, at that time, he was at Netflix. I think he did this cute little open source library called Key that there was the name for that. That was controlling the access to repositories, and we revoked always the least privilege access. So whenever something was not used, it was periodically checking it and started to reduce the access of these.
That's right.
Automatically granted stuff.
That's right.
It was fully automated, and this could work on a larger scale, but it obviously is way more complex.
So guess what's inherent with those service accounts? I talked about it earlier. When you're talking about service accounts, what's usually embedded? Password. We talked about that. And that password is typically what?
Never expire.
Static.
Yeah.
Somebody gains access to that, and that's what the bad guys are going after too, right? They're gaining access, they're seeing what they can do, and then all of a sudden they find themselves in elevated privilege. So the way that's managed is you get a good control via a sponsor of those service accounts. You remove the password, the embedded password, you create an ephemeral session with that service account. So no password is ever exposed, and it's time bound. So it's purpose built, purpose used. So any other questions?
Comments on Zoom, but I'll ask you, questions. So one person said they use PAM accounts in Delinea. I don't know if they, did you turn off the volume?
I didn't mean to.
Okay.
No, it's on.
So, they use PAM accounts in Delinea, and for app administration, they use on-prem server.
You're losing out on efficiencies.
I mean, probably.
I mean, and Delinea is a sponsor of CSA. I'm not ever going to disparage the names of even non-sponsors, right? Everybody is purpose-built to provide a solution. Some will fit your environment, some won't, right? And it's kind of up to you to evaluate who provides you the best service, who provides you, brought it up earlier, predictable success. And you have to come up with your outcomes, what your desired state is. And if one vendor can get you there with more confidence than another, that's where you should feel comfortable. Again, it comes down to also the predictable costs. When you start talking, and this is where, I used to be in the on-prem world, but when I talk about predictable costs, on-prem versus cloud, hands down, cloud wins. Hands down, you can create more efficiencies with the cloud because you can't build in your own infrastructure the type of environment that a cloud solution provider is going to provide you, because they're providing you at scale. They're providing you at the availability levels. They wouldn't exist if they're not doing it at a high standard. So, the build versus buy, you'd have a hard time convincing me that the build is better and suited for your environment.
Alex, in your experience, what's the primary method of getting into these accounts that these attackers are using? What's their entry point?
It's always phishing, right? Phishing, smishing, you throw the INGs, that's the easiest one. But the other one is what I mentioned earlier. It's impersonation, right? I think even the Change Healthcare was this one. They called into the help desk as the CEO and asked for a password change. Oh my God. And they're in. It may not have been the CEO. I can't remember, but it was a call into the support center to change a credential, and it happened. So, but yeah, it's the brute force attacks and everything like that. If you guys are not implementing MFA, shame on you. Right? That's the most basic level baseline support or benefit that you can provide your organization. I represent Savient. There's a reason we're not an IDP, so we don't do authentication and authorization. So think SSO and MFA. It's commoditized. You guys can use Ping. You guys can use Okta. You can use Microsoft. You can use, fill in the blank of the IDP. Anybody does it. They all do it the same. They all do it kind of well. Who's providing you the best service? That's who you should go with, right?
POC on different products. So there are other things also in market which kind of get the just-in-time access, generated privileged accounts, and all those features. So what makes Savient stand out, and what would be your one saying that this is better than other?
So you're not a plant. You're not in the room on purpose, right? So
That you might get subscribed.
yeah, I think there's yo-yos and mints, right? I'm gonna quickly go over this. Your world is really complex. If you guys are in IT security, it's complex. Typically, this is the way the landscape looks, right? There's an IGA solution, there's a PAM solution, there's an app GRC solution, third-party management, ITSM, right? Fill in the flavor or whatever ones you're using and everything. And then there's this environment over here. This is the infrastructure. These are the applications. It's just a handful of them that everybody's touching, right? And this is what starts happening, right? All of these integrations have to take place. Anybody getting scared yet? Not yet. Okay, nobody's getting scared yet. Okay, all these solutions have to talk to each other. Nobody's scared yet? Okay, And then all of a sudden you got all these users over here, right? Administrators, application owner, compliance, end user. Call this the spaghetti slide. So if this isn't scaring you, this is what most of your environments look like, because you got point solutions doing each one of these functions. How's your upgrade efforts going in any one of these? Are you guys stuck? You guys are static, right? You're stuck. I can't upgrade because I got to do all this regression testing with everybody else and make sure it still works and make sure it still connects over here. And you're like, oh, damn. And now you're stuck 19 versions back because you're afraid of breaking something. This is what sets us apart. We collapse it all into a single platform. That's what differentiates us. It's one identity warehouse. You can create, we can absorb sources of truth. We can be your source of truth, combination of them, right? Usually, you know, I'll use Workday, for example, from an HR perspective, could be a source of truth. We consume it. We can talk back to it. We've got plugins and everything. We do updates every single month and it doesn't break anything because everything resides in the same platform. So everybody gets the benefit from the instance. What was that? We're not in ITSM, but I bring it up because there's such a dependency within the space of ITSM. We have to be able to consume and talk back to the ITSM solution. But being able to do it centrally from one platform, that's what gives it the advantage. But no, we're not in the ITSM space. So, I mean,
Until you buy service.
we're not buying service. They might buy us.
It's so expensive.
Yeah, they might buy us, but. So, you know, bread and butter has always been in the, you know, the identity governance, but believe it or not, we actually started in the app GRC space. And the cool part about our app GRC solution is it's, I call it multi-flavor. You know, everybody knows SAP GRC and everything. It's been around forever and everybody uses it. But what if you had multiple acquisitions that took place and you've got several different flavors of ERP solutions? We're able to do cross-application, fine-grained controls, you know, looking for those SOD violations, right? So it gets really granular, you know, firefighter access, you name it. So what I was talking about today was the external. The cool part about this platform is you can start the journey with us anywhere. It's not an all or nothing type of thing. And we can coexist. If you already have, you know, SailPoint, we can coexist with them just for your external identities. And the cool part about that is they have to bring their A game every single day. Because if they slip up, you have an easy transition. You can pivot to another proven solution. We have to bring our A game every single day. And we've got a thing within our environment. We have to have you deployed and show value within 3 months.
We're talking about application access, so how do you differentiate from SailPoint and that?
They're typically a single flavor. You're talking about ERC Maestro or whatever it's called. It's not my area, but I think that's the solution they acquired.
They have 80 different.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. It's not. I don't get granular into GRC, so I can't answer that.
I was just gonna ask, kind of partially answered it. If you had struggles, if a company said, hey, we're really having some challenges with onboarding, know what we want, we're just having problems implementing it. How would you recommend like a POC or have a trial to evaluate? You want to do that?
Yeah, so I mean it's kind of standard kind of sales motions. I'm an advisor. I don't go through those sales motions. I mean, Jason can walk you through that, but just to simply answer your question, what we would do for you is kind of demonstrate kind of first and foremost is application onboarding. The quick nature that we can get your end applications, your end environment onboarded to the point where you can provision and deprovision access to it. So you mentioned onboarding, right? You're not talking about doing any certification campaigns. So we can simply, in a very, show you how we can onboard and offboard people via POC honestly, we can do it within our demo environment as well. Who are you with?
I can't say out loud.
Talk,
Why don't we talk after?
talk to Jason.
You can have a yo-yo.
Yeah, have a yo-yo. Anything else? Right now? No, I'm like exhausted. I mean, I don't want to kill these people with time here. I mean, I'd love to, but that would,
Anything to show.
I think we have some time set up for your shop, right?
I think Jason, just schedule that with the IAM team, is it done or not?
No, it's ongoing.
That's all. Email, Lauren.
This kind of like, he was kind of scaring me earlier about, who was it? Somebody was up here and it was contentious in nature. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. They give me a beer. No. Did this hit the mark for this group?
Yeah.
Good. Thank
Any
you.
questions or comments? I don't see, yeah. I mean, comments, just great presentation, but I don't see any questions coming. A lot of people thanking you on Zoom.
Hey, I appreciate y'all.